Tripcast vzniká díky podpoře Kura.
I don't claim to understand shamanism. I don't claim to understand indigenous people. I don't think you can. I think other cultures really are other cultures. There's a lot of positive, incredible experience and learning that comes from being exposed to other cultures. Most of the time, what you're learning is about yourself. Almost any time that you look at other culture and you try to extract insights or conclusions about who they are or why they do what they do, you're going to be wrong. You're almost guaranteed to be wrong.
V tomto podcastu nijak nevyzdvihujeme psychotropní účinky jakýchkoliv psychoaktivních látek a nikoho nenabádáme k jejich užívání.
Hello everybody, welcome at the next episode of CHEP's Tripcast, the podcast of Czech Psychedelic Society. Today I welcome in the studio Jerónimo Mazarrasa from the ICEERS, the International Center of Ethnobotanical Education, Research and Service, with a seat in Barcelona. It's an international organization, and Jerónimo is working as a program director. So Jerónimo, I would like to ask you, what does it mean? What are you programming?
Well, ICEERS is a non-profit based in Barcelona that has been now in its 15th year. And we focus on the challenges that arise from the globalization of indigenous plant medicines. So there's a series of mostly plants. And there's also some fungi and animals that have a history of traditional use, and they have been in the past few years, as people know, globalizing. Their use has become globalized. And this brings some challenges and some opportunities. And the focus of our work is that given that this is happening, that these practices are globalizing, we would like to accompany, support as much with these processes so they will be as beneficial as possible and as undetrimental as possible while staying in right relationship to the cultures of origin.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Just to clarify for the listeners, what kind of plants are we talking about?
Yeah, so the word ethnobotanical is a hard one to find an exact concept for this. We struggle with it ourselves, but ethnobotanicals, what we refer by ethnobotanicals or indigenous plant medicines, are basically psychoactive plants that have a history of traditional use. So this includes ayahuasca, iboga, the coca leaf, tobacco, but also things in theory like betel or psychedelic mushrooms, peyote. All of these would be part of our mandate. In practice, most of our work revolves around ayahuasca, iboga, cannabis, and now more and more the coca leaf.
Mm-hmm. I will jump into the pool quite fast. You mentioned that we are living in a time of globalization of these plants. What does it mean, or what does it mean in the way of how is ICEERS reacting to the globalization?
Well, as you know, these plants have very long histories of traditional use. So there's a series of cultures that have been in relationship, indigenous cultures that have been in relationship with these plants for hundreds, if not thousands of years, basically since time immemorial in many cases. Now, with the general phenomenon of globalization and colonization, people from outside those cultures have come in contact with these plants and then these practices as well. And slowly their use has come out of these communities. What we find is that while generally speaking, these plants are very important, respected, and I would say valuable plants in the communities of origin. Very often when they leave those communities of origin, they are globalized, the plant is globalized without the context of use, without some of the sort of original knowledge about how to best use this plant. The result is that while these plants in the communities of origin are extremely, valuable and beneficial, when they get globalized, they often become detrimental and problematic. Tobacco, for example, it is the most it's the main shamanic plant of the Americas from north to south. It is widely used, highly revered, important part of the culture of these societies. When it was globalized and taken over and its use spread worldwide, it got turned into commercial cigarettes that became the second cause of preventable death worldwide. So on the one hand, the same plant in some cultures is a sacred being, and in others, it is a toxic drug. We acknowledging that this is what happened, and it has happened a number of times. It happened with tobacco, it happened with the coca leaf, and it's happening with other plants. Acknowledging this sort of contradiction, that the same plant can have such completely different roles in two different societies, we wonder what is it that is the difference between one place and the other, and what is it that we are perhaps not learning in our cultures.
Mm-hmm.
So in ICERS, we would like to see one day in which these plants that are now being globalized become hopefully as beneficial to us as they are, as we can see they are to the cultures of origin. Now, this includes a number of important cultural shifts and cultural changes. These plants present us with a very sort of with cultural challenges. Very often, as a culture, we don't know what to do with these plants, and that's why they end up in the places that they end up. It's a lot of it has to do with our ignorance of what they are, what they mean, and how they can best be used.
And then we start to study them scientifically, and not actually coming back to those who has been using them for hundreds and thousands of years.
Yes.
And if you in ICES have been wondering of what is it, what did you figure out that should that is missing in our cultural perception or in our relationship towards the plant?
There's many explanations. All of them are valid, and none of them are complete because it's a multifaceted. So there are pharmacological aspects. Simply speaking, the extracted compounds are not the same as the plant material. So cocaine is not the same as the coca leaf. The coca leaf is not the same as cocaine. By not the same, I mean there are different substances that have different absorption rates. They have different. They have different composition. They have different. So everything about them is different. Many of the problems we have came because we extracted purified compounds and left and separated the plant. That's one part. There's other part of it that is not that's pharmacological. Another part is cultural. We don't treat the same. We don't have the same relationship with a sacred object than we have with illegal contraband, which is the place that we have put many of these things. So it's very hard to establish, any resemblance of a healthy relationship with something that is illegal.
Yes.
That's also part of it. All of these things are true, But I think there's also other issues that have to do with there's deeper things, and that have to do with what kind of questions we tend to answer when we approach these plants versus the types of questions that indigenous societies answer when they approach these plants. Mm-hmm. So normally when we look at these plants, what we think is we think individually, what can it do for me? Or what can it do for a person? Or can it be a medicine? Can it wake me up? Can it can it make me sleep? Can it take pain away? Can I remove my depression? Can it, these are all individual applications. Mm-hmm. Always, almost universally, when Westerners approach these plants or these substances, they are thinking of individual applications.
Self-healing,
or just heal, but it's all about
self-understanding.
It's all about self-soothing. Or getting more energy, getting less. However, what one can observe is that very often the cultures that have had long relationship with these plants and they have very established traditions of use, these traditions of use, they answer collective questions instead of individual ones. The question that is being answered is, how can the effects of this plant best put in the service of the community?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what ensures, in a way, or this is part of the reason why what you see is that indeed in those societies these plants have a pro-social effect, that they benefit the larger community and the individual, and versus a lot of the uses that we give them in the West that have a sort of personal and not pro-social effect, and they end up becoming detrimental. This, of course, there's layers of problems added by the fact that the compounds are purified, by the fact that they're illegal contraband and by the fact that they are, and prohibition. All of these things sort of pile on top of this very complex set of relationships that we establish with these very powerful plants that have, like all powerful things, have great potential to go in one direction or in the other.
So as ICIRS is working in order to prevent the negative impacts of globalization of these plants, what are the negative impacts? What are the dark sides that we can observe?
Well, I mean, first of all, people are getting arrested and going to jail for working with these plants. And this is something that we don't think anybody should go to jail for engaging with these plants, if they haven't committed any other crimes. We have a legal support center, and we've now been giving support in more than, I don't have the numbers, but I think it's about 300 cases in about 50 countries in the past 10 years, where we advise and support legal defense teams, also to avoid that negative precedents. Mm-hmm. Many of these plants are new, their globalization is new, and that means that the legal systems of most countries don't contemplate the existence of these plants one way or another. They are in a gray area of the law. Sometimes the compounds they contain are scheduled, while the plants themselves are not. And this creates a certain sort of legal ambiguity. There's also aspects having to do with the direct impact that these plants have on people, and sometimes people have bad reactions. Sometimes people have poorly managed sessions. Sometimes people take these plants in less than optimal circumstances, and sometimes there's even malicious applications of these substances. We have a free support center, a harm reduction program called ICIRS Support Center, now called El Faro, which has been operating again for more than 10 years. We give free integration support to people who've had challenging experiences, and we also give free information about drug interactions and with medical treatments for people that have questions about their medical treatment and whether it can go together with these plants or not. These are our harm reduction programs. We also have a training program, ICIRS Academy, where we have collected all of the knowledge that we have gathered over the years, and we teach a course on increasing the safety in ceremonial plant work outside of native context. And we have another program on integration to complement the training of people that already have some that are sort of health professionals that need additional training to be able to help people, accompany people after these experiences, which can be quite puzzling. So these are sort of our frontline programs. They deal directly with. There's other programs that are closer to the transition, the pathways, the transitions that will be needed in order slowly to transition culturally, societally, to a place where we sort of accept and integrate first of all, the existence, and then the application, the usefulness of these practices. And this includes, for this, we do policy work at the international level. We've written draft law proposals. We've tried to change laws and propose laws in a number of countries. We advise countries who are trying to change their drug policy. We work also directly with facilitator communities, and we try to encourage processes of self-regulation.
Mm-hmm. What does it mean?
Well, it means that if you consider this as sort of a new profession, that didn't exist before. You could call, I don't know what the name would be, plant ritualist. And if you look at the way other professions that didn't exist before became legitimized in our societies, so for example, acupuncture, there was a point in which acupuncture was sort of a weird practice that people were doing, and it was popular in China, but very new for us. And there was a process by which acupuncture became a legitimate sort of part of our society. Or you can look at coaching. Coaching was also sort of at one point sort of a completely new profession, and nobody was exactly sure what this meant and how it worked, and slowly it became legitimized. The way this process goes is always similar, not just for these professions, but for many other collectives that have been formally not recognized by the mainstream society. The collective has to organize, and the collective has to push, for their demands, and this takes some time, and organization. But eventually, these demands are received by the society, and the society integrates this collective that was formerly not being integrated. This goes for everything from gay marriage to coaching to many other things. So processes of self-regulation are processes in which the members of this community, the community of facilitators, the community of people who participate in these rituals, in sort of ceremonial plant work, create organizations that can give them representativity, and then begin agree on minimum safety standards, and begin this slow, gradual process of coming in dialogue with the rest of the society to say, hey, we are okay, we are good citizens, we have a right to exist, and we would like to be recognized and received as productive members of this society. Formerly, we have been excluded and we have not been allowed, and our rights have been denied under all sorts of excuses, but mostly usually ignorance because of difference. But we would like to change this, and eventually this change comes. We would like to see a similar process happen for sort of the traditional indigenous medicines outside of the countries of origin.
Nowadays, with the running psychedelic renaissance, that is a lot about medicalization of psychedelics and its use in the clinics and for people with diagnosis. I wonder, because there, in that context, we learned about preparation, the session with psychedelic substance or plant, and then the integration. So if you talk about a plant ritualist, would it be someone who does all these three parts, or is it mainly that maybe plant ritualist is holding the space during the experience itself, but the other parts are held by someone with a different education?
Well, we don't know what it means, right? That's what we're beginning to work out. So we have, on the one hand, a series of cultures that have had very long relationship to these plants. But this relationship comes from by a very defined context, which is very different from ours. These plants and their use originate in community contexts. Now, as these plants reach, the globalized world, which community is very frail, or if not existent, where you're talking about urbanized societies. Now, a number of things begin to happen that didn't happen in the communities, in the groups of origin. And then certain sort of aspects of it begin to take more importance that were sort of implicit in a community context. The idea, for example, of screening or integration is sort of embedded in the community. It's not something that needs to be structured because it happens in a group, in a space where people are seeing each other. It's a very before and after. So it's a very different context from a group of strangers who get together for a weekend retreat, and then everybody goes back to their separate lives, and they don't cross paths anymore, and they don't see each other. So on the one hand, we have, a very valuable culture of use and knowledge and wisdom around the use of this and the application of these plants that come from people that have very long relationships with it. And on the other, we have a context that is very different from the original context, and that has some additional, some new or particular requirements that belong to this context. Now, as we are building the new relationship that our societies will have towards psychedelics, which are new for us, but they're not new for the world, and they're not new for many other cultures, but they are definitely new for us. We are sort of collectively trying to figure out how best to do this. And what we are beginning to see is that there are different sets of skills that are necessary. And you could roughly say the before, the during, and the after. So the before has to do with screening the person. Is this person adequate? Is there any contraindications? Are the medicines that they are taking or the medical treatments that they have, did they have previous surgeries? Will this be, is this person fit enough to withstand this experience? The during has to do with the fact that, now this person is going to ingest a substance that will make them have a very powerful experience. How do you contain, support, accompany that while the person is in this state? And then the after has to do with the person had, this very powerful experience, and now how does that get integrated into their life? Now, in terms of our medical profession and the training that our medical professionals have, our medical professionals, broadly speaking, health professionals, I'm including also mental health professionals, psychologists here. If you took our health professionals and you look at the training they already have, part of it would fit. They could do well with the before in terms of determining, interactions, and so this is something that a medical professional with some additional training could do. Fairly, not a lot of additional training, in fact. And if you look at the after, you also find that our mental health and psychologists, etc., with their training, with some additional training about the particularities of this experience, they could do fairly well. And then you have the middle, and the middle is a person who has taken a very powerful psychedelic substance and can have a very large range of experiences, some of which can be quite peaceful, and sort of internal, and sometimes all the way to something that it can get to be quite physical, sometimes even, explosively so. Sometimes people go to a place where they don't know you're there anymore. They don't react. People can get very upset, very nervous, very fearful. I mean, a number of, sort of very... And how this is managed? Well, this is something that our, health professionals have no training in whatsoever, because they've never had to deal with situations like this. Perhaps, psychiatric nurses have some training in terms of just how to be next to someone who's, temporarily very upset.
Yes.
So the question is, which parts, how much do we need to learn in order to manage this? How much do we know? How much we don't know? And how much can we learn, or how much can we collaborate with people who already know, who already have experience managing this? So a lot of the parts that I would say most make our health professionals nervous, which have to do with precisely what happens when things during the experience get a little bit difficult. This is precisely the part in which most of the traditional facilitators are most comfortable, and with which they have the most experience. So it could be, and we would certainly like to see, more collaboration, more humility on both sides, and more of the side to work together, because I think there is sort of mutual compatible needs and mutual compatible lacks, necessities and skill sets that would both would benefit from a closer collaboration than is happening.
I believe that one crucial part of this all is training, and nowadays what we see is not very broad training of the therapists that are sitting psychedelic experiences mainly or in research or with ketamine. And I wonder, if we look at the experience of the indigenous people, how is it there? How does a person become a shaman to actually facilitate such an experience as a psychedelic?
Yeah, I mean, what you can see when you study the cultures of origin is that this training is never short. It's very, very long. It is under direct supervision. There's one important part that happens under direct supervision of a teacher. So there's an aspect of it that is an apprenticeship. And this is because there's one aspect of the work that is sort of, it's embodied work. It's not something that can be written down in a book and learned. The same way that painting cannot be written down in a book and learned. The same way that surgery cannot be written down in a book and learned. The same way that many other practices, dancing, etc., they require a sort of presence and active doing. And for this, a person that has been doing this for more time than you, that can sort of, for a while, direct you and teach you and sort of show you. So apprenticeship, very, very long training. And then the other two aspects that I would highlight is, one, a personal process that runs parallel to the process of learning the technique. So this is familiar in our culture. This is familiar to psychotherapists and psychoanalysts. You will study psychology and you will study psychotherapy, but you will not be able to become an effective psychotherapist until you have gone through this process yourself. Mm-hmm. So you have to be in analysis before you can analyze somebody else. And this is completely understood. This is common knowledge in psychology. You will not be a good analyst if you haven't worked on yourself and you haven't done this process. This is, in a way, this process is also very much present in the, not through analysis, it's a different process, mind you, but there's an experience process of relationship with these plants that one has to do before one can give this to other. This is the third part, and I would say the fourth part that is often overlooked about shamanic initiations is discipline. There is a very big underlying aspect of all of this, in which people who are being who undergo shamanic initiations have to constantly test their discipline. And this goes for very, very long periods, very, very long periods where they will not be allowed to eat certain things or to have sex or to touch certain. I mean, there's many different, and it changes from culture to culture. But the common element is that the discipline of the practitioner is being honed. The practitioner, the future shaman, has to learn to tell himself or herself no all the time, and to be a sort of a master of their own drives, their own fears, their own hungers, their own desires. This part is often overlooked. Very often these restrictions are sort of presented as sort of cultural taboos, as opposed to as important source of practice and honing of a certain discipline, which is the ultimate tool that these practitioners have to have, because they will be working with very powerful plants. That's what they are called, plants of power. They're not only powerful plants, they're plants that give one power. And because all power comes with risks, and all power comes with the danger of corruption, all power corrupts, discipline becomes an integral part of the training to hold the person accountable and responsible to himself, and to help him be able to resist the temptations that will come from this power.
Yeah, all power is a lot of responsibility. That's for sure. And it is very difficult in our legal frame here, that the therapists usually they cannot even undergo like many or number of experiences themselves, because it is not legal to give substance to someone who doesn't have a diagnosis. And so this is a very difficult part to navigate. And also, as far as I understood, when someone is kind of becoming a shaman, going through the initiations, very often it is not necessarily people who wants to become a shaman. That it is that's what I heard, like a calling from outside, or that it is not I want to be a doctor, I'm gonna go to study university and I become a doctor decision.
Yeah, I think the other aspect, I mean, this again, I think these plants present us with just by looking at the traditional use, I will speak from personal experience, just looking at the traditional use of these plants in indigenous cultures has made me question so many things about my culture and the way we do things. I think this is part of what's fascinating about this globalization and this encounter, and this part of the reason why I'm involved in this work. But I think one of the things that, again, these practices put over on the table, that is something that in our society has been forgotten, is the role of what we would call talent and we would call vocation. So we know, for example, that there's such thing called talent, and that some people have certain talents and some people don't. This for us is very clear, for example, with art and artists. We understand that there's certain people that are born with a certain something. They're good at drawing, they're good at music, they're good at something. It's a certain talent. You can see it in them since they are very little. And then this talent can be expressed or not. This person can go and learn, and then they will turn their musical talent into being a musician. These are two separate things. You can have musical talent and not be a musician. Mm-hmm. So there's talent, and then talent gets turned into, and we understand also that you can go to art school and not be an artist. And there's artists that never went to art school. And there's artists who went to art school and became better artists. All of these combinations are there, but we understand that being an artist is not something that you can choose. And it's also not something that can be learned in school, even if you go to art school. The part that we have forgotten, I think, is that medicine has many things in common with this, and we have tended to forgotten. Medicine, broadly speaking, is a vocational act. This is what traditional cultures will tell you. Certain people are born with the talent and with the call for medicine. And this is something that it just happens. Some people have it, some people don't. It's not something that is chosen. Now, these people can act on it and then take the training and become doctors or not. This is also not something that needs to be. Now, I think this is something that still operates. This is sort of a human truth, but it's something that we have taken culturally, we have stopped paying attention to. So we think doctors are people who want to be doctors and who go to university. And then if you go to university and you study to be a doctor, then you should be a doctor. What we see in traditional cultures is that it's a little bit more complex than that, and that there's a vocational aspect. I think most people that go to medical school actually have this vocation, and I think most people, almost everybody who goes to nursing school has this vocation. Nursing is the place where a lot of the vocational aspects of medicine are sort of clearly expressed in our society. Most people who are nurses by vocation. When people, on the other hand, the profession of medicine, though it can be quite rewarding, it's also very hard. You are dealing with sick people all the time. People are dying. People are getting sick. There's people that you cannot help. There's aspects that are very rewarding, and there are aspects that are terrible. Now, the shamanic profession, to call shamanic is perhaps not the right term, but just we will use this term, have even more responsibilities because their roles are not just medical, quote unquote, but they have to do with much wider protection of the community. So, there's some very rewarding aspects to this work, but there's also some pretty serious dangers that come from performing this work. So it's absolutely normal that people that understand, what medicine is or what, shamanism, again, to use this term is, will have second thoughts about whether they want to do this or not. I think if you don't have second thoughts about it, it's because you don't understand what the job is, because otherwise you would have second thoughts. I mean, it's just to sort of put it, at the most surface level of it. Harm comes to doctors for working in medicine. Why does harm come to doctors for working in medicine? Because they are around sick people all the time, just at the very surface level. Diseases, you will get contagious. Diseases will jump onto you, for example.
Yeah.
And that's the lowest level of it, right? You are dealing with illness and problems, and that's your job, right? So when you are moving in that environment, things will come to you from precisely the environment that you're working on. Now, that's a downside to the privilege that is, being able to work on medicine and perform medicine. So I think all of these sort of, or again, talking purely personal, these are some of the reflections that I came to from observing the role of these plants in indigenous societies, and then looking at our societies and looking at our doctors and looking for the underlying sort of human truths that are manifested in both places.
I do have a little bit of a background in studying religious studies, and so looking at how academia is looking at shamanism. And I know that you spend a lot of time with different tribes in Amazon, and I wonder if you, the academia is looking at shamanism as something that is like a theater being performed, and it definitely is part of it. But from my perspective, that is not the whole picture. And so I wonder if you could, how would you describe what is shamanism? I know.
Simple question. I would say what one sees when one looks historically at how Westerners, academia has written about shamanism, what you see is that how shamanism has been explained has changed according to the times and according to the academic theories that were fashionable at the time. So, first they were seen as witch doctors. Then they were seen as psychopaths. They were seen as sort of there was a sort of early moment where shamanism was seen like they were basically schizophrenic people, and that's how primitive societies dealt with schizophrenic people. This was part of the, Then they were seen as political, then they were seen as religious figures, then they have been seen at some point as pre-scientists or proto-scientists, as the ancestors of scientists. They have been seen as, and the numbers of ways shamans have been seen by academia have changed so much. And now, this sort of like performative theory is very popular, and now it's seen as performance and it's looked under than. So, the one thing you can say about academic theories about shamanism is that they say as much about shamanism as they say about academy.
Very limiting.
In every time. Now, I think this is also completely understandable. I don't claim to understand shamanism. I don't claim to understand indigenous people. I don't think you can. I think other cultures really are other cultures. And I think there is enormous value, and many anthropologists have said this before me, in what is called sort of control equivocation.
Equivocation.
As getting things wrong. Almost any time that you look at other culture and you try to extract insights or conclusions about who they are or why they do what they do, you're going to be wrong. You're almost guaranteed to be wrong. Now, there's a way to manage this and make it controlled, and this is what the best anthropology can be. And there's a way to not manage this and just be, continuous set of projections that again says more about you than it says about the thing that you're witnessing. Still, there's enormous benefit that comes, just like the benefit that comes from traveling. They say, the Sufi have a saying, it says, if you want to know yourself, travel. If you want to know the world, see that's at your doorstep. Right?
Yes.
It works. So there's a lot of positive, incredible experience and learning that comes from being exposed to other cultures. Most of the time, what you're learning is about yourself. Or I would say some of the best insights that come from what you're learning about yourself. And it's just sort of being aware of this. And being very careful. Now, academics and, generally speaking, Westerners have a long history of misinterpreting and misunderstanding indigenous cultures.
They try so hard. And a lot of anthropologists, we can see that they want to live with the tribes and learn the language, but then there is also a question how they can understand shamanism if they are not maybe initiated themselves.
So again, it's all about being humble enough to say, this is what I saw and this is what I thought.
Yes.
And I'm for sure missing a lot.
Yes. I would now kind of come back to ICEERS. So before you mentioned the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, I think it was not named, so that's the legal activities. And I know you're guiding the Ayahuasca safety course. Could you introduce it? Who is it for? What can people learn?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, one thing that is being globalized is these plants that have a history of traditional use. Some of this globalization is quite old. The globalization of tobacco is 500 years old. The globalization of coca is, I think, say 200 years old or something like this. And some are more recent. For example, the globalization of ayahuasca or the globalization of iboga. These are just a few decades. What we have seen is that while what happened with coca or what happened with tobacco was that the plants were globalized without any of the context of use, without any of the culture of use that was around these plants. And then the plants became, the use of these plants usually became problematic for us. Coca became problematic for us. Tobacco has become problematic for us. And this pattern sort of happened itself for every plant. So, also our use of cacao is very, very different from the use that the Aztecs gave, etc. There's been something exceptional that has been happening in the past few years, especially around the globalization of ayahuasca, and is that ayahuasca is being globalized with some of its original context of use. So when you think of ayahuasca ritual outside of the Amazon, when you think about people consuming ayahuasca outside of the Amazon, the image that comes up in your mind is some sort of ceremonial place, and there's a circle, and somebody who has more experience than the rest is serving the ayahuasca and is determining the dose, and this person is taking care of the group and is responsible for the group, and is usually performing some sort of ritual act, usually involving music that accompanies and modulates the experience of the people. This is what we imagine when we imagine an ayahuasca ritual outside of the Amazon. Now, if we imagine an ayahuasca ritual in the Amazon, a traditional ayahuasca ritual in the Amazon, by traditional I mean from indigenous groups all the way to the Santo Daime and the Brazilian religions, every one of those elements would also be there.
Yeah, it wouldn't be so different.
It could be very different in many ways, but this basic structure, I would say sort of the essence or the bones of it, are still present. And this had never happened before. So, and I think this is a positive development. This means that for the first time, we're beginning to try to use these substances in similar ways and for similar reasons as the cultures of origin. And with this, hopefully, we can avoid many of the problems we had with tobacco, with coca, with other plants that we didn't use in similar ways or for similar reasons as the cultures of origin. Hopefully, this is my hope. There's no guarantee, not always well with Western ayahuasca use, quite the opposite. There's enormous problems that we deal with every day. arise here that go from cultural appropriation to bad practices but still there's something in the process that gives me hope that we can, as a culture, do things better than we have been doing it up to this point when it comes to certain very powerful plants that are very sacred to indigenous groups and that we tend to sort of misuse.
Yes.
So with that said, there is enormous challenges that come when we think about ceremonial ayahuasca work outside of the countries of origin. Because it's very new, because there's some challenges that are particular to our urbanized context and that don't apply in the original Amazonian context. And because, there were very different people with different problems and also different health conditions, and for many reasons. Fortunately, we have been doing this now for some years, and all sorts of better practices have been developed by people having experience working ayahuasca outside of indigenous context. But all of this knowledge was sort of atomized. It was distributed, it was kept in small bubbles of people that were not groups, that were not necessarily talking to each other, not necessarily communicating with each other, and this information, this knowledge was not flowing.
Because they are operating in underground.
Because they're operating in underground, because they don't know about each other, because there's distrust, because clandestinity, because all of these things. Because indeed, it's very difficult to establish better practices when you have to operate in clandestinity.
Yes.
So what we have attempted to do with this course is to gather all of these disparate sources, the best techniques from many disparate sources, together with everything that we learned running our support center for 10 years and seeing more than 2,000 cases, together with everything that we learned with our scientific research. And we pull of this in one course that teaches only safety, baseline safety for people working with plants. Safety, I mean psychological safety, physical safety, legal safety. This is a very, very different proposal from most of what is out there that has to do with teaching people to be facilitators. This is not a course to learn how to be a facilitator, much less a shaman. We don't think, I'm not even going to go. It's not, and it never will be. What it is a course for people who are already working, who want to improve their base safety and their practices around this. So it's much more practical.
Yeah, sounds like also learning or becoming more aware about certain standards that should be placed and that maybe sometimes people don't even think about.
Yes, I think generally speaking, among facilitators, there's a lot of focus on the idea of best practices, of what is the best possible work and what they would look like, the optimal work. And perhaps not enough attention is given to minimum safety standards. So it's very hard to agree on best practices, but I think it's possible to agree on minimum safety standards. What is the ground below which, things should not be done? What is the minimum safety that absolutely has to be taken care? And what we find, I believe, is that if you take care of that, if your minimum safety practices are up to standard, then many, not all, but many of the most common sort of challenges, you can do away with them. Mm-hmm. So, there's one aspect of working with these plants that are very powerful, and there will always be, I think, an element of chaos, sort of uncontrollable. But there's many, many accidents that we see every day at the support center in our work that can be avoided with just sort of a little bit more thorough protocols.
Yes. Do you think that it is more established for Western facilitators, like operating in Europe, or doesn't matter? Is it like worldwide good base to learn?
The course is called Increasing the Safety of Ayahuasca Ceremonies Outside of Native Contexts. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So we have focus in what happens, native context is what happens when a taita a curandero, a maestro, a shaman is operating in their community. That's the native context.
Yes.
Now, what is outside of the native context is, when that taita goes to a city, then even though the ritual is completely traditional, the context is no longer a community native context. All the way from traditional indigenous practitioners operating outside of their communities, all the way to shaman, neo-shaman sort of applications of this. All of these will be considered non-native, and that's where our focus is.
Yes.
On what happens outside of the communities of origin and the work outside of the communities of origin. We wouldn't be so bold as to advise anything to indigenous people working in their communities of origin about how they can improve their safety. They know this well enough. They have been working they have very long traditions of use. They're the ones that can teach us something. So it's about what happens outside of the.
Mm-hmm. In one of the conversations we had, you mentioned that ICIRS is filling the gaps, like when there is something that should happen but no one is working on it, ICIRS starts to work on it, and then when there is maybe someone else who want to do that activity, then you let it go and start to do the new thing that needs to be done. I find that a very impressive philosophy of an organization. So what are the gaps that needs to be filled from this perspective nowadays?
I mean, we are a small organization, about 20 people full time, taking on an enormous task. So we are perpetually overworked and under budget, under funded. There is a lot more work to do than we can. And there will be a lot more work to do than we can for a long time to come. So in this aspect, we take, I think, a fairly pragmatic position, which is like, what needs to be done? And there will be many things that need to happen. What things, how do we choose out of all these things that need to be done, which ones we're going to do? Well, is there somebody else that could do this already? If somebody else could do this already, then fantastic. Then this other group, person, organization can do it, and we don't have to, And then what is the things that need to happen that nobody else is doing for whatever reason?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, we recently completed our first clinical trial, and it was an ibogaine for opiate cessation. Now, it's been known that ibogaine has enormous potential for opiate cessation since the 1960s. It is the main reason why ibogaine has been globalized, et cetera, et cetera. There's an entire underground of clinics that do, addiction treatment with ibogaine. Now, how come in those 60 years nobody ever had done a clinical study in a hospital about using ibogaine to quit opiates? There's many reasons I'm not going to go into, but for many reasons, it had not happened yet. So it had to be an NGO from Barcelona who's not really into clinical research that had to do this clinical research, the first in the world, to finally have solid numbers that say, hey, by the way, yes, we've known this informally forever, for 60 years, but now here's some hard data to back it up that yes, iboga and ibogaine have enormous promise in the treatment of opiate addictions. This is an example. We did it not because nobody else was doing it. And now it's done. It might well be the last clinical trial and research that we do. I don't know. Maybe some similar circumstance will come, but this is an example. So it's because we have a very narrow object of work. So it's only these plants that have a history of traditional use, and we cannot step outside. We do not work with purified compounds. We don't work with MDMA. We can't. But with this focus being very narrow, the activities we can do around this are very broad. Everything from clinical research all the way to political incidents, all the way to harm reduction, all the way to... So this gives us a lot of freedom to act very fast based on the needs of the community. So, the legal support service came out directly out of, the community reaching out for us, lawyers reaching out for us, needing help, defending trials, needing better information, needing expert witnesses, because this is very new and most lawyers don't know, most judges have no idea what this is. So out of that emerged a program. And it was the same with the support center, and it was the same with a lot of the work I do. So we try to start from the needs, and then we look at what can be done, and then we look at, can other people do it, and what can we offer that is unique, so we try not to duplicate efforts. We have enough things to do.
Sounds thought through. And one of the other activity that ICIRS is doing is a World Ayahuasca Conference. I kind of know that soon there will be one coming. What is it about? What is the intention of such a gathering?
Well, it's to gather the community. Yeah, so this will be the 4th Ayahuasca conference. It's going to happen next year. We don't have the 2026. We don't have the exact dates yet, but it will be, stay posted. It will be announced soon. And every one of these conferences have managed to be gatherings of what is a very, very diverse community of people around the world of ayahuasca. Not just it's diverse in terms of its traditional uses. I mean, what happens in the Amazon around ayahuasca, just in the traditional world, is very, very diverse. But then when you go into the globalization, then all sorts of people are coming in. There's now researchers involved. There's people that do policy involved. There's people that are, there's participants. There's facilitators involved. It's a very broad, very rich, very, very, very diverse group of people. And what they have in common is that they're all interested and fascinated in this plant that comes from the Amazon and its potential and its promise. So the World Ayahuasca Conference becomes a sort of a 3-day gathering of these very, very diverse people, where we try to, something that is, again, very important for ICIRS, is to sort of establish relationships and act as a bridge between different groups that normally are not very often talking to each other. So the drug policy people and the researchers and the indigenous communities and the facilitator communities, and how we can begin to, these people can get together and, establish bridges between each other.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So the dates are not known yet, but does the country, where is it going to happen?
It's going to be in Spain, most likely, in Girona again.
That's not too far for the interested people to travel also. Yes, I think that we are slowly coming to an end of our interview. And I wonder what would be, for the last question, what would be an ideal future that you would imagine for ayahuasca integration into our society, into the world?
I would like to see, speaking from a purely personal perspective, I would like to see a future in which when people are going through certain difficulties or certain transitions or certain difficult decisions have to be made, something has to be let go of, something new has to be started. I don't know. There's many, people, in one's life, people undergo many such transitions. There's sort of shifts in which there's a before and after. I would like to imagine that there's a place, I don't know what the name is, and I would like to imagine that it's in many, some of them are in urban centers, some of them are outside in the countryside, in beautiful nature. There's a variety of these. And these are places where people can go and take time off to work on these transitions. And these places are staffed by people that know how to work with these plants and these substances and can accompany people in these transitions and take care of them and support them while they're doing this. And then as they go through these transitions, afterwards they can go back and rejoin society renewed and reinforced. I think this is what we see in a way that happens in traditional cultures and indigenous societies. This is sort of the role. I mean, it's a lot more than this, but this is an important part of the role that these plants can play. And I think I would be very happy if one day in the future, these plants, ayahuasca in this case, can be as valued and as beneficial for us as it is for people and cultures in the Amazon, while living in respectful relationship and right relationship to these cultures of origin, while acknowledging that this is where it came from, and that we are indebted to the people that developed this and that took care of it, and from whom we ultimately received it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. This is a beautiful dream you draw, and we can believe and hope that one day it gets fulfilled. Thank you. Until the next time.
I thought I would tell a story. When I started drinking ayahuasca more than 20 years ago, and I saw an image, and it was a tree monkey. These are these monkeys that in the Amazon they have a long tail, and they're like sort of dark brown monkey. And it was a tree monkey, and he was on a branch, and there was a little cable going up, and then on the side, the monkey had a lavalier mic like this clipped on the side. So it was a monkey with a microphone clip. We were trying to film something that happened inside of people, because that's where ayahuasca takes place.